Welcome to Learn the Word, the daily Bible teaching program of Calvary Chapel of Delta, and Pastor Doug McLean. Today, we're joining Pastor Doug in Matthew 24 for the message, Warnings for the Waiting. So if you're not driving, grab your Bible and open up to Matthew 24 as we begin.
After unmasking the hypocrisy of the religious leaders, warning the people about them, and warning those leaders that they were on a woeful path towards judgment, Jesus was sure to reveal his heart. He explained that he wanted to gather them as a hen gathers its chicks under its wings. He wanted to gather them near to him to protect them, to be a refuge for them, to bring comfort to them. Their problem was their unwillingness to come. He was willing, but they were unwilling to be gathered. And so he said, if you look at verse 23, verse 38 and 39, he said, "See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, context is always the best when you're interpreting the text. And the last time he used this word house, when he said, "See, your house is left to you desolate," the last time he used this word house was in Matthew 21:13. And in Matthew 21:13, he said, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of thieves." So Matthew 21, he was speaking of the temple. Instead of it being a place where people could come and connect with the Lord in prayer, they had made it a place where people who were stealing from others could hang out comfortably, a den of thieves. And that's what the religious leaders were, thieves. In fact, Jesus' assessment of them in chapter 23 and verse 25, he said that they were full of extortion. That's a form of thievery. They were full of extortion and self-indulgence. And so the entire purpose of the temple had been supplanted, had been undermined, perverted, corrupted from what God wanted it to be. It was supposed to be a place that was there for the glory of God. It was supposed to be a place for the glory of God, not for the selfish interest of the religious leaders. It was supposed to be teaching people about God's holiness, about God's plan to accept a sacrifice on behalf of the sinner, about the need for a mediator, about the fact that there was only one way to approach God. But instead, it had become a place where you could go and kind of check the box, pay your tithes, fulfill your religious obligation. And so Jesus came to the point where he said, "See, your house is left to you desolate, abandoned, empty, uninhabited." Very similar to what happened in Ezekiel chapter 10 and 11, when the glory of the Lord departed from the temple, a temple that had become a place of idolatry and false security. The glory left, and then literally destruction followed as Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the place in 586 BC. So here you see, in some way, history repeating itself. At the end of chapter 23, Jesus left. And he said, "You're not going to see me again until you welcome me, until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." He left, and it was truly empty. All that to set up chapter 24. After he said, "Your house is left to you desolate," the word then says, chapter 24, verse 1, "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to him to show him the buildings of the temple." Now understand, as we look at this, they had been there before. So it's not like they were seeing everything for the first time and saying, "Jesus, you got to see this stuff." They weren't like impressed, amazed, awed by it because they were seeing it for the first time. And it was impressive in size and beauty and engineering. In fact, they still can't figure out how they put it all together. In fact, you can see the retaining walls of the platform that the temple was built on. When you go to Jerusalem, you can see it today. And some of the stones there are just huge. They have no idea how they got them in place. I mean, there's a stone there you can see that's 45 feet long, 12 feet high, 12 feet deep. They say it weighs over 400 tons. How did they get that stone there? How did they put it in place? So it was big. It was super impressive. And they saw this temple that was, covered in marble, they say, trimmed with gold around the top, something that was just designed to impress. But what they were doing is they were showing Jesus the buildings and pointing them out in response to what he just said. And they didn't understand how this magnificent temple in such size and opulence, and they didn't know how this was going to be left desolate. I mean, if you looked at it, it seemed so strong. It seemed so full of activity, so alive, so beautiful. How could it be desolate? And so in response, Jesus said in verse 2, he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now that was a shocking statement. He wasn't speaking symbolically. Every stone would come down. 70 AD, less than 40 years later, it happened. Titus led the Roman legions to lay siege to the city, and history tells us that there were orders given initially that when you take the city, do not destroy the temple. It was just such a beautiful place. Don't destroy the temple. But during the siege, a fire broke out, and the gold of the temple that was along the top of the temple that decorated it, the gold that was on the inside that covered it, melted and ran down in between the stones. And so the Romans disassembled the whole temple to scrape the gold out. You can see it today. You go to the archaeological site called the Davidson Center. It's an archaeological park. It's by the intersection of the southern end of the Western Wall and its intersection with the southern retaining wall. And they've excavated down to the Herodian Street level, first century level. And they have found these massive stones that the Romans pushed off the Temple Mount, and they lay there in the pavement. You can see it. You can look at it. You can read these words of Jesus, and you can say, Jesus said it. It happened. There it is. An event in history. It was all thrown down. In fact, it was so destroyed that at the end, you couldn't even tell that there was a temple there. Then verse 3 tells us, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?'" So this means they went down into the Kidron Valley. They ascended the Mount of Olives, which faces the Temple Mount. And they were sitting there with the temple complex in plain view right before them. Mark tells us in his account, Mark chapter 13, verse 3, Mark 13:3, that it was Peter, James, John, and Andrew that came with this private question at first. And as they asked this question, understand, they thought they were asking one question. In their minds, it was a singular question. Because, you see, they not only heard of Jesus speaking of leaving the temple desolate, they also heard him speak of how the religious leaders will eventually recognize him as Messiah, and they will eventually welcome him. And it seems they were thinking that something so cataclysmic that would result in every stone of the temple being thrown down would certainly accompany his triumphantly returning and being accepted, bringing the times of the Gentiles to an end, the end of the age. Little background, Daniel chapter 2. You could study it, read it, maybe listen to the teaching later. But in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which really defines the times of the Gentiles. At the end of that vision, Daniel saw a stone coming from heaven that was cut without hands, coming down and destroying all the world's kingdoms, and that stone then becomes a mountain that fills the earth. It's a picture of the Messiah's kingdom coming and destroying all the world's governments and establishing God's government on earth. Zechariah chapter 14 describes a time when all the nations will be gathered against Jerusalem, and the Lord will go forth to fight, and he will stand on the Mount of Olives. And the word says that when he touches down on the Mount of Olives, the whole mountain will split in two, which will radically affect all the buildings in the area. Okay, so these are Old Testament prophecies, and as they come to Jesus, they know these things. They're coming with an informed question. And they ask him what to them was a singular question, because they couldn't imagine the destruction of the temple without the triumph and return of the Messiah and the ushering in of a new age. When they said when they said what will be the sign, they thought it was all one statement. Now, in Luke's account, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all give us this called the Olivet Discourse, second longest continuous teaching of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. But Luke 21, in Luke's account, Luke 21, Jesus answers the question about when the temple will be desolate. Luke 21:20. Jesus said, Luke 21:20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by the armies, then you know that its desolation is near. And in that passage, he makes it clear that the destruction of Jerusalem is not the end of the age. He went on to say in Luke 21:24, he said, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So the times of the Gentiles started, Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem. And according to Daniel 2, they'll continue until the Lord comes to establish his kingdom on the earth. But that's the new age we're longing for. I am. Anybody else longing for the new age? That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm looking for. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So clearly the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the age are two separate things. So although they thought the only way the temple would be destroyed would be for Jesus to come in victory, set up his kingdom, and bring the new and glorious age, their presupposition was incorrect. The destruction of the temple that stood in Jesus' day is a matter of history. The coming of Jesus and the end of the age are matters of prophecy. It's the future for all of us. I do find it interesting, though, that when the purpose for the Old Covenant was fulfilled, remember the purpose for the Old Covenant was a tutor to bring us to Christ. That's what Paul said in Galatians, that the law was a tutor to bring us to Christ. When that purpose was fulfilled, the ability to truly follow biblical Judaism was brought to an end. The system had fulfilled its purpose and had become corrupt in its practice, and that was brought to an end. You see, without an altar, without a priesthood, without the Ark of the Covenant, without that place to go, without the sacrificial system to resolve the issue of your sin, you couldn't follow biblical Judaism. And the rabbis had to modify it to make it possible to follow. It had to be radically modified. And so rabbinic Judaism, very different from what we read in the law. Now, before we go any further, because we're going to get into things that are to come, I think it is very important to just skip ahead just for a moment and read verse 36. We're not going to get there today, but I want to preface what I say by verse 36, when Jesus said, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So no one knows the day or the hour of his coming. which is also the end of the age. With this in mind, let's see how Jesus answered the questions that they asked. Verse 4, Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." So he began to answer their question with a warning. When people want to know when people want to know what signs to look for, the first thing that Jesus says is beware. The first thing he does is gives a warning. Why? Because end times prophecies and predictions have been used to deceive and manipulate and motivate people to embrace errant ideas, messed up theology, and to waste their time and money supporting false teachers. Sensationalism, focusing on all the signs, predicting the end, can create a huge following, huge book sales, great numbers of followers, and we would say today, views. It's true. Man, make a prediction online, say it with authority, make it look authentic, and man, you'll get a lot of people following you. And with that, for them comes significant revenue. You understand that, right? And so Jesus says, be careful. And worse yet, that's one thing. Getting distracted and wasting your money and getting all wrapped up in things you shouldn't. That's one thing. But worse yet, cults have been known to focus on last days scenario to lead people astray. Understand that. Many cults are based in what they say is going to happen at the end of the world. And there have been false Christs, even in my lifetime. I can look back and, from Sun Myung Moon and the Unification Church to David Koresh to Jim Jones. These guys all had end times views that they used, and then they proclaimed themselves messiahs. So look, if you're seeking signs, if you're looking forward to his coming, if you're eager to see Jesus. Now, I'm eager to see Jesus. Anybody else here eager? Look, so this is a great warning for us because I want to see Jesus. Okay, I really am longing to see him, but there are people out there you have to watch out for that want to take advantage of that desire and take advantage of you. 2 Timothy 3:13. 2 Timothy 3:13 says, "But evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived." So it's going to get worse. John 8:31 and 32, remember this, just foundational principle. John 8:31 and 32, Jesus said, "If you abide in my word," if you abide, which means remain in my word, "you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." So be a person of the word. Take everything to the word. It's good to long to see Jesus. It's good to be ready to see Jesus, but you have to be careful. When you hear things, you got to bring it back to the word and look at the context of the passage. Now, after warning them of deception, he said there in verse 6, he said, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Please underline end. We're going to get back to that. The end is not yet. "For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. And these are the beginning of sorrows." That also very significant, beginning of sorrows. Now, historically, since Jesus was here the first time, you look at this list: wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilences, or diseases, deadly infectious diseases, earthquakes. All these things are a part of human existence. This is a part of being here on this fallen planet. And what happens is when there are major events, big wars, it happened when World War I happened, World War II happened, or pestilences like COVID-19, when you have these big events, big earthquakes, we've had many big earthquakes in our day. when those things happen, people tend to get troubled or alarmed. And I can see how God can sort of redeem that and people start seeking the Lord. That's a good thing. But just understand that when Jesus said, look, don't be troubled or alarmed, he said it knowing human nature, that people get troubled or alarmed when they see these things happen. He says, look, don't be troubled or alarmed. He said, because the end is not yet. Please notice, he's focusing on the last part of their question. He said in verse 6, the end is not yet. They wanted to know, when is the end of the age? Or what is the sign for the end of the age? Same word, the end. Telos is the Greek word, where we get our word telescope. And the idea is the fulfillment, the achievement, the completion, the conclusion. So he's focusing on their question about the end of the age. Now, although these things have been common things since Jesus was here the first time, I also ask you to note verse 8, where he said, these are the beginning of sorrows. The word sorrows there is the word they use for birth pangs. Birth pains, as you know, start mildly and increase into a stronger and more frequent rhythm. They increase in intensity and frequency until the birth of a child. I've witnessed it 5 times in our family. It's just the way it works. It's the way God designed it. And so Jesus took that term, and what he's saying is wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, those things are the beginning of sorrows. They're the beginning of birth pains, which means they will increase in intensity and frequency until the end. And I think just from an empirical basis, I think it can be established that these things are becoming more intense and more frequent. Now, because they're birth pains, I'd like you to note 2 things. 2 things. Number 1, that means it's going to get worse before it gets better. Amen, ladies? It's going to get worse before it gets better. Number 2, it means we're headed somewhere good. There's a birth of something new coming. There's a desirable end coming. So it's going to get worse before it gets better, and we're headed to something good. Now, it's interesting that this rhythm will really set in Revelation 6 after we're in heaven, after the church is taken from the scene. You see in Revelation 6, the church, by the way, in heaven, chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Revelation, chapter 6, with the church in heaven, the very first thing you see is the false Christ, the Antichrist, the deceiver arrives. Very first warning, be careful of false Christs. And then the next thing that happens is war breaks out. Wars and rumors of wars. Then after that, famines arrive and pestilences. Same pattern here. Revelation 6 verse 8 says that through those initial events, 25% of the population of planet Earth will die. Based on what we know today, about 2 billion people. And then in Revelation 6, 9 to 11, it speaks of martyrs. And we're going to see that in verses 9 and 10 of Matthew 24. And then Revelation 6:14 speaks of every mountain and every island being moved out of place. That's great earthquakes. Every mountain, every island being moved. And then as you continue through the book of Revelation, those same things happen, but the intensity and frequency increases until you get to the very end, and all the armies of the world are gathered together for a battle. And this huge earthquake comes, Revelation 16, 18 to 20. Revelation 16, 18 to 20. And in that earthquake, every city all over the world will fall flat, and every island will flee away, and every mountain will fall flat. And then the Lord comes. Then there's the birth of something new. New age, new kingdom. So again, the key is verse 8. These things are going to intensify until the end. And I suppose as you see them increase, you just need to know we're moving closer to the end. Remember, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And we're headed to a good end, something we desire. Remember that, birth pains. Log that in, birth pains. It's not Braxton Hicks anymore, by the way.
You've been listening to the message, Warnings for the Waiting, from Matthew 24. This teaching was recorded during the Sunday morning study through Matthew at Calvary Chapel of Delta. So if this program has ministered to you, and you'd like to listen to more teachings like this, or find out about this ministry, you can find us online at calvarydelta.com. There you can watch live services, listen to Bible teaching, and find out about what the Lord is doing here in Delta, Pennsylvania. So again, our website is calvarydelta.com. That's calvarydelta.com. Now that brings us to the end of our time for today, but we're so glad you chose to join us to learn the Word.